The Great Pyramid, one of the most studied ancient riddles on Earth.
There were tens of thousands of people here building the pyramids. Where's their settlement?
6 million tons of stone, shaped and transported over 30 years, to build an eternal tomb with a sacred purpose.
Underneath one of the most famous monuments on Earth may be a hidden structure. In March 2025, a team claimed that 4 satellites had detected something beneath the Kafra pyramid through hundreds of meters of solid rock. The claim was extraordinary, and within days, one of Egypt's most respected archaeologists publicly dismissed it as fake. Yet the researchers behind the scan insisted they had discovered something far more significant: massive underground chambers, deep vertical shafts, and a hidden system that could completely change how we understand the pyramids. Most visitors to Giza never stop to wonder what might be buried beneath their feet. They see the 3 enormous pyramids rising from the desert and assume they are looking at the complete monuments. But for decades, researchers have questioned whether undiscovered structures could still exist deep beneath the plateau. And if you want to uncover the truth behind this mystery, make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because what comes next goes far deeper than the pyramids we can see. The pyramid at the center of the controversy is Kafra's pyramid, the second largest pyramid at Giza. Built for Pharaoh Kafra around 2558 to 2532 BCE, it originally stood about 143 meters tall and has a base more than 200 meters wide. It is roughly 4,500 years old, yet its interior remains surprisingly mysterious. The known burial chamber is located low within the structure and was found empty. There was no body, no treasure, and very few inscriptions. For a monument that required enormous resources and decades of construction, the interior seems strangely unfinished. Scientists have tried to look deeper before. In 1968, Nobel Prize-winning physicist Luis Alvarez used cosmic ray muons to scan the Kafra pyramid for hidden chambers. The technology was essentially an ancient X-ray, using particles passing through the pyramid to search for empty spaces. The experiment detected nothing significant, but that didn't prove hidden structures didn't exist. It only showed that the technology available at the time couldn't reveal them. For more than 5 decades, the pyramid remained silent, and Giza itself is far more than 3 isolated pyramids sitting in the desert. The plateau contains the Great Pyramids of Khufu, Kafra, and Menkaure, along with temples, causeways, tombs, mastabas, and the Sphinx. Everything was constructed across carefully selected limestone, with quarries positioned around the plateau to supply the enormous building projects. This wasn't simply a collection of monuments, it was a carefully engineered landscape, designed with remarkable precision. And that is exactly why the possibility of structures hidden deep beneath it has fascinated researchers for generations. For years, mainstream archaeologists treated claims of enormous underground chambers as speculation. But in 2025, a new scan reignited the debate by claiming that something far deeper than anyone expected was waiting beneath Kafra. For decades, the Giza Plateau had been surveyed, mapped, explored, and studied by countless archaeologists, leading many experts to believe there was little left to discover. Then the technology changed. In March 2025, Corrado Malanga of the University of Pisa, radar engineer Filippo Biondi of the University of Strathclyde, and explorer Armando May presented a controversial claim that immediately sparked a major debate. They hadn't excavated the pyramid or drilled into the ground. Egyptian law protects the site and largely restricts invasive exploration, so the team relied on satellite-based technology. They used what they described as synthetic aperture radar, Doppler tomography, a method designed to detect extremely small movements and frequency changes within the ground, and use those signals to reconstruct structures beneath the surface. The concept is similar to sonar, except instead of mapping the bottom of an ocean, the system was supposedly being used to map structures buried beneath solid rock. According to the researchers, they didn't depend on a single satellite. They said 4 separate satellite systems, including Italy's Cosmo SkyMed and the commercial Capella space constellation, detected similar underground patterns. Biondi argued that the agreement between the systems was what made the discovery significant. One unusual reading could be a technical error, but multiple systems apparently identifying the same buried geometry would be much harder to explain. The team later introduced artificial intelligence to help interpret the enormous amount of radar data. Supporters argued that AI could identify patterns humans might overlook and reduce subjective interpretation. Critics saw the opposite problem. If the underlying signal was ambiguous, an AI system could potentially create patterns where none actually existed. That disagreement is at the heart of the entire controversy. Did the technology uncover something genuinely hidden beneath Kafra? Or did the interpretation turn uncertain signals into an elaborate underground structure? And according to the team, what they found was far more dramatic than a simple empty chamber. The first major feature they reported was a series of enormous vertical structures. They claimed to have identified 8 cylindrical shafts descending deep beneath the pyramid and into the limestone below. These weren't described as ordinary sloping passages or natural cracks, but as vertical columns of apparent empty space arranged in a deliberate pattern. The researchers also suggested that similar structures appeared in relation to the other pyramids, raising an even bigger possibility that the monuments might be connected to a much larger underground system. But there is an obvious alternative explanation. Limestone naturally develops cavities. Groundwater can dissolve the rock over enormous periods of time, creating caves, channels, and underground voids. The Giza plateau is built largely from limestone, so natural cavities are hardly surprising. The problem, according to the researchers, is the apparent geometry. Natural caves usually form irregularly, following fractures, water pathways, and weaknesses in the rock. They don't normally create multiple matching vertical structures arranged with apparent symmetry beneath a monumental structure. And then came an even stranger detail. The team claimed that each of these vertical shafts appeared to be surrounded by a spiral-shaped structure, almost like a winding pathway, descending around the outside of the cylindrical column. If that interpretation is correct, then what lies beneath Kafra may not simply be a collection of natural cavities. It could represent something far more deliberately constructed. And that is where the real controversy begins. A spiral is not the kind of pattern erosion normally creates. It is the kind of structure that suggests deliberate design. And that brings us to the second clue, what those shafts supposedly lead to. According to the team, the 8 shafts descend more than 3,500 feet beneath the plateau before opening into 2 enormous cube-shaped chambers. Each chamber is said to measure roughly 80 meters, or about 260 feet, on every side. If accurate, each would be larger than many modern stadiums, completely enclosed beneath hundreds of meters of solid rock. Critics immediately raised a serious objection. Radar becomes increasingly unreliable, at extreme underground depths, especially through dense limestone. That concern cannot simply be ignored, but the reported geometry is what makes the claim so extraordinary. A perfectly shaped underground cube with flat walls and right angles is not something normally created by natural erosion. If the readings are accurate, then either the data is being misinterpreted or someone created an enormous artificial chamber deep beneath the desert. And that leads to the third clue, the one that changed the discussion from archaeology to something much stranger: what the structure was supposedly designed to do. Radar engineer Filippo Biondi did not describe the shafts as tombs or storage rooms. Instead, he suggested that the underground network could be connected to the idea of information and processing. He even argued that energy generation itself can be understood as a form of information. His most repeated description was that the pyramids might be only the tip of the iceberg, almost like a lid covering something much larger underneath. That idea immediately revived a debate that has existed for generations. Engineers and alternative researchers have long argued that the pyramids may have served a purpose beyond burial, pointing to their unusual geometry, precision, internal chambers, and alignment. If the reported underground structures were ever independently confirmed, they would give that theory something it has never had before: a possible mechanism hidden beneath the monuments. There is another layer to the story. Ancient Egyptian traditions contain stories about hidden chambers and sacred halls associated with knowledge and the god Thoth. For centuries, such stories were treated as mythology rather than physical descriptions of underground structures. The team behind the scans, however, has drawn a connection between those legends and what they claim to have detected beneath Giza. Their supporters see a remarkable coincidence: ancient stories describing hidden halls of knowledge beneath the sacred landscape, followed thousands of years later by radar data supposedly revealing enormous underground spaces. Skeptics see something very different. They see an extraordinary claim built on data that still needs independent verification. The investigator argues that the myth itself may have preserved a memory of something real. But that raises an even bigger question. What kind of structure would require all of this? Why build a spiral staircase around a deep shaft? Why create 8 matching vertical columns reaching the same underground level? Why construct 2 enormous cube-shaped chambers and then place some of the heaviest stone monuments ever built directly above them? A simple tomb would not require any of that. A tomb needs a chamber, an entrance, and somewhere to place the dead. This is the reasoning that has fueled the pyramid as machine theory for generations. The builders used huge quantities of granite inside the pyramids, transporting the stone enormous distances. Granite can also produce small electrical effects when subjected to pressure or vibration. They created chambers capable of producing strong acoustic resonance and aligned the entire complex with remarkable precision toward the cardinal directions. None of those features were strictly necessary for a basic burial monument. Supporters of the machine theory argue that such details make more sense if the structures were designed to resonate, transmit, store, or manipulate something. But before accepting that interpretation, there is another side of the story that has to be taken seriously. Within days of the announcement, Zahi Hawass publicly rejected the claims. Hawass is one of the most prominent figures in modern Egyptology, having served as Egypt's Minister of State for Antiquities and spent decades working around Giza. His response was direct. He said the claims were completely wrong and had no scientific basis. He also stated that the Egyptian authorities had not authorized the researchers to conduct this kind of work around the Kafra pyramid. Hawass questioned whether the claimed radar technique could produce the detailed underground images being presented, and argued that the structures described by the team could not have been detected in the way they claimed. He eventually went even further, dismissing the entire story as fake news, and some of his criticism is difficult to ignore. At the time the claims spread online, there was no widely accepted peer-reviewed scientific paper presenting the discovery. Instead, the announcement came through a press conference and accompanying media material, leaving other researchers without the normal scientific process needed to independently examine the methodology and data. Then there is the biggest problem: depth. Radar can be extremely useful for examining surfaces and relatively shallow underground structures, but its ability to resolve precise features decreases dramatically as signals travel through dense rock. The researchers were claiming to identify remarkably detailed structures thousands of feet beneath the plateau, which is an extraordinary technical claim requiring extraordinary evidence. There is also controversy surrounding the researchers themselves. Lead investigator Corrado Malanga is not primarily known as a conventional Egyptologist. He has a long history of investigating UFO-related subjects and other fringe theories, giving critics another reason to question the conclusions. The situation became even more controversial when the team suggested that some of the structures could potentially be tens of thousands of years old, a claim that would completely challenge the accepted timeline of Egyptian civilization. But no excavated evidence has been presented to establish such an ancient date. So now we have to ask the question that this kind of story often avoids. Does any of this prove that an ancient machine is buried beneath the pyramids of Giza? No, honestly no. The most extreme version of the theory, the idea that the pyramids were power plants, engines, or remnants of lost technology, has not been proven. The claim depends on a radar technique that has not yet gone through full peer review, applied at extraordinary depths, where its reliability is heavily questioned, with no excavation confirming even one of the reported chambers. But there is another reason this story refuses to disappear. The 2025 Kafra claims did not appear out of nowhere. They arrived during a decade of legitimate peer-reviewed discoveries showing that the Giza Plateau contains far more hidden spaces than researchers once believed. In 2017, the Scan Pyramids project used cosmic ray muons to examine the Great Pyramid of Khufu and detected a large void above the Grand Gallery. The discovery was published in Nature and accepted by the scientific community. Then, in 2023, researchers identified another hidden corridor behind Khufu's northern face using similar non-destructive techniques. In 2024, researchers working near the Great Pyramid's Western Cemetery detected an L-shaped underground anomaly roughly 33 feet long, buried about 6.5 feet below the surface with another highly resistive structure beneath it. The researchers argued that its shape was difficult to explain through ordinary geology, and further investigation followed. Then, in April 2025, a German-Egyptian team reported 2 hidden air-filled voids behind the polished granite on the eastern side of the Menkaure pyramid. Using radar, ultrasound, and electrical resistivity methods, they suggested the spaces could be connected to a long-suspected second entrance. Unlike the viral Kafra claims, this work went through the scientific literature and received a DOI. Even the controversial Italian team's own interpretation contained another striking claim. They described additional multi-level structures connected by passageways between the deep chambers and the surface. Whether those structures are real remains disputed, but the important point is that the proposed layout resembles an organized underground complex rather than a simple, natural cavity. And this is where the story becomes interesting. Remove the Italian team's most extreme claims. Forget the stadium-sized cubes. Forget the idea of an ancient machine. Even then, Giza is still revealing hidden corridors, voids, and underground anomalies that researchers did not fully understand a few decades ago. The ground beneath the pyramids is not simply an empty block of limestone. The real debate is how extensive those hidden structures are, whether they were deliberately constructed, and what purpose they served. If even part of the deeper architecture eventually proves artificial, it could change how we understand the pyramids. They may not have been isolated monuments, built only to contain royal burials. They could represent the visible portion of a much larger engineered landscape extending deep beneath the plateau. That possibility would also give ancient Egyptian traditions a fascinating new context. Stories about hidden halls, sacred chambers, thoth, and preserved knowledge beneath the earth were traditionally treated as mythology. But ancient cultures often preserved fragments of older traditions, long after their original meaning had been forgotten. For generations, those stories kept pointing downward, and now modern technology is doing the same thing. There is one final detail that makes the claim even more controversial: the proposed age of some of these structures. The Italian team suggested that certain formations could potentially date back as far as 38,000 years. Consider what that would mean. The pyramids are roughly 4,500 years old. A structure dating back 38,000 years would predate dynastic Egypt by an enormous span of time. It would mean Kafra's builders may not have created the deepest complex at all. They may have inherited something already ancient and built the monuments above it, but there is currently no excavated evidence proving that 38,000-year date. It may be the weakest claim, but it raises the biggest question. If there really is an engineered structure beneath Giza, who built it and when? Were the pyramids builders responsible for the entire complex, or did they inherit something far older? That possibility would challenge the accepted timeline of human civilization, which is why the idea remains so controversial. For now, the evidence is still disputed. The Kafra pyramid is real, the scans were conducted, and the researchers stand by their findings, while Zahi Hawass and other experts reject them. No widely accepted peer-reviewed study has confirmed the claimed shafts, chambers, or underground structures, and no excavation has verified them. The reported formations remain buried beneath the plateau, untouched and unconfirmed, and because Giza is heavily protected, confirming something supposedly thousands of feet underground would require an enormous operation involving years of planning, funding, and official approval. Even exploring hidden spaces inside the Great Pyramid has taken sophisticated technology and years of work. Reaching a disputed structure hundreds or thousands of feet below the limestone would be far more difficult. For now, the radar claims sit in an uncomfortable middle ground, too controversial for mainstream archaeology to accept, but too fascinating to simply ignore. And perhaps that is the real mystery. There may be nothing beneath those stones, or there may be structures we have only just begun to detect. For 4,500 years, the pyramids have kept their secrets buried. The real question now is whether we will ever be allowed to uncover them. If this changed how you see the pyramids of Giza, watch the next investigation and decide for yourself how much of our history may still be waiting underground.